Welcome everyone to another CTC Software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis. I'm the Director of Development here at CTC Software. And today we get to introduce a brand new addition here to the Nexus Suite. It's the BIM Automation API. We're going to go over a fairly comprehensive introduction of its capabilities and some of its uses. Now, of course, as always, while we go through our webinars, we record these, and we'll be posting this to our YouTube channel probably later the same day. And also, as always, we like to try to answer questions in line. So if you have questions or you think you're going to have questions, go ahead and open up that questions panel and go to webinar. For those of you participating live, and get ready to throw those in there. I'll try to answer them while I'm going through content, or we save a QA session, of course, for the end. Without any further ado, let's jump right in and talk about the topic of the day. So we are right now in this session unveiling the newest possible module here in the Nexus Suite. It's called the BIM Automation API. It installs by default. So if you're installing Nexus 26.1 or newer, it should automatically show up for you unless you've disabled it for some reason. Now, this allows you to have a secure REST API access to any active Revit session, especially on your workstation, but depending on how you set up your network security, you could also access other users' workstations if you want. And this allows any kind of external application that you write, that you internally customize, any workflows, to automate a whole bunch of Revit functions pretty much from any programming language. Whatever language you feel comfortable in most likely has the ability to talk to a REST API. I mean, shoot, I've been using VBA, and I'll show some examples of this, VBA in Excel for a little while here, just to kind of do some dabbling and some working with this. So you'll see some examples of that. The nice thing about this is that by running this code outside of Revit, now Revit itself is a, quote, single-threaded environment, means it can only do one thing at a time, otherwise it kind of gets upset with you. So by having this ability to run stuff externally, you can talk with Revit while also doing other stuff. So you can automate other things, and this actually gives you a lot of extra stability, and in a lot of cases, some improved performance. And gives you full multi-threaded workflow support if you need that, if you want that, if you want to co-process things in web portal and maybe some time tracking in Deltek, and maybe also do some stuff in the Revit desktop. You can do all of it at the same time with some multi-threading because you're doing this externally in your own app and talking to the Revit environment. This is pretty powerful. And you can do things in Revit like opening and saving projects, loading content, creating views and elements, edit parameters. Like, there's a lot of stuff. We're going to go through a full list here in just a moment. And you can do all of this from your own environment whenever you want. Now, this, for a lot of us, is pretty game-changing. It lets us decouple ourselves from specifically Dynamo that effectively runs inside Revit and being single-threaded and having a lot of complexities. It lets you talk to your own intranet web page and do some interesting things. We'll talk about some of those examples in a moment here as well. But this lets you take that Revit API and be a lot more scalable and not have to be super proficient in C#, which is the primary language typically used in the Revit space. There's other languages you could use, but C# is the most popular. So today we're going to go through a few things. We're going to talk a little bit about the capabilities of the BIM Automation API, that desktop automation API locally running in your Revit environment. We're going to talk about some real-world automation use cases and give some examples of what some others have already begun working on or have already implemented. We're going to talk about how to connect and execute some API calls using pretty much any programming language you would like. So totally up to you what language you want to author in again, because it's agnostic to that. And we're going to understand some of, we'll talk quite a bit throughout this entire thing about the performance benefits and a little bit about some system setup things that you might want to put in place. And there's a lot here. So first off, let's jump right in and talk about some of these automation capabilities. Let's just start high level and we'll dig deeper and deeper as we go. So what are some of the things that the Nexus desktop automation or BIM automation API, what are some of the things that it can actually do for you? Well, first off, it can do quite a few actions that are project centric. Things like opening a project model, either from a local environment or from BIM 360. Either way can work. You can sync to central. You can enable work sharing within the project. You can open detached and save as something. You can sync to central and relinquish controls or not. There's a lot of project-based actions that are just sort of at that high model level that you can do. So think open, save, work sharing from pretty much any environment. That's kind of the major actions there. The other thing that you can work with here after you've enabled work sharing, or if work sharing is already enabled in your project or project template, you can manipulate work sets, add work sets, delete work sets, rename them, set them active, move elements to work sets. You can do a lot with this API that surrounds sort of the work sharing work sets environment. You can manipulate Revit links that exist in the project. So you can reload links, you can unload links, you can delete them if you need to. You can manipulate a lot of stuff around the Revit links space. You can work with levels, create new levels, manipulate existing levels, rename them, standardize naming conventions if you want to. Quite a few things with the basic elements of levels here. And of course, put levels on correct work sets. That's obviously a good function that you could be doing here as well. You can create and manipulate views. So new floor plan views, potentially new section cut views, creating new ones, associating view templates, renaming views, standardizing things like title on sheet. There's a lot you can do with the views themselves. Most specifically, the one that most people tend to be early on the most interested in is creation of the views. You can also, of course, then as a good pairing to that, create sheets and manipulate the sheets, change their names, their properties, update sheet numbering, standardize spellings, all of those actions that you would typically associate with sheet work itself. You can also do some limited manipulation of scope boxes, things like copying, renaming, getting some of their properties, using those scope boxes to associate to views, some things like that. You can also, and this is really, really powerful, you can load Revit component families into a project. So this is the family load command. You can also load system families. This is things like inserting sheets, inserting typical details, loading view templates into a project. This can all be done programmatically. So component and system family loading. And finally, there's a ton of element actions that you can take. You can get the properties of families, types, instances in the project, know exactly where they're placed, know every single property parameter value, custom or otherwise, about these elements, and make edits to anything that is editable. So you want to change how room numbers are set up, change it. You want to get information about the number of how much area is on a certain level, fetch it. It's all available because you can get, and in a lot of cases, push values programmatically with this automation API. So this opens the door to do a lot. There's a ton of use cases here for how this might be used. The most popular one is something like a project startup workflow, whether you're doing it from a desktop app or like an intranet page. This is pretty popular. You can actually use an internal intranet page to help your team kick off a project. That starting up of a project might initiate something like a Deltek Vision project in the Deltek space, because you can talk to their API from your intranet page. Maybe it establishes some Revit project models and sets up the linking association, saves them to a known location, sets up the views based on some parameters set by the end user. Maybe it creates a CTC project in the CTC portal. Maybe you're setting up some project data tracking for it. You're setting up some rules inside of Ally. All of that could be done from an intranet page, and part of that is driving the Revit project environment. You could get down to setting a specific version year to have this project set up in. Start it in 25, start it in 26, and have it know what templates to open. This project startup, if you can imagine it, you can probably do it from an intranet page with any language you want to use, ASP.NET or, I don't know, Ruby, Rails, or whatever you want to use, because all of them have some kind of REST API, and Deltek's got a REST API. CTC's Nexus Portal Automation API has a REST API, and now we're talking about the BIM Automation Local Desktop API. All three of those are all REST-based APIs. They all interact in a very similar fashion, and an intranet page could do a full project startup, and when it's done, just present the user on their machine with the project they're supposed to be in. That's really powerful, and you have full control. There's no dialog boxes in CTC's tools or somebody else's tools they have to go through. It's not multiple different add-ins. It's you controlling and guiding your bespoke workflow if you want to set that up. And it's not that difficult to do. If you want it, this is another popular thing that I see people doing. They're setting up like an intranet page as well, setting up kind of like a large language model chat engine that lets them talk to their Revit project model. Hey, tell me the total square footage on level 1. Tell me what department is the biggest. Show me a graph of the breakdown of my building's areas. Tell me how much furniture of certain types I have. Change the properties of all these door numbers on level 1 to go with this new numbering schema. Hey, if you want to set it up, go for it. The API is there, and you can make this interact with something like an OpenAI language model or an old Llama language model that's privately hosted, you name it. If you want to go there, the door is now wide open because you're not bound to just being inside Revit. The API unlocks that for you. Another really popular conversation I have is automated standards enforcement. You know, in the moment while users are working and they create a brand new object, the API could interact with that and look at what was set up inside of there and prompt them to do some things. Now, we have other tools that do this as well, like Nexus Ally does some of this, but if you wanted to further customize that and for something really specific for the end user, you can go ahead and do that. But another one that I find really key here is in the moment, loading in and replacing a family in the moment. So user loads some kind of garbage thing. Maybe you load in, replace, and delete the garbage thing, right? You could do that. I'm not saying you have to. Obviously, this is just a tool. This is here for you to use this any way you see fit, right? But these are things that you could do. Loading and replacing family content, loading and replacing typical detail content, scanning the objects, comparing them, understanding, does this look like a certain kind of a detail? Because you can ask it that, and then leveraging that information to do some pretty interesting things. I also like this one. Some of you have asked me about, can I go in while users are working and get this super deep information from the project model? You know, we have the project activity logger for Nexus, and it gets most of what most people want. But every once in a while, somebody says, yeah, but I want this extra thing that's custom to me. Well, this API, while users are working, every time they sync to Central, you can detect that and then go, hey, go fetch this information from the model that isn't already grabbed by PAL and use that somehow. Maybe you want total square footage of the whole building based on rooms or areas or spaces, or you name whatever the thing is you want to go after. You can go after this kind of information. Maybe instead of just headless custom data farming, you want real-time spreadsheet access to this information. You want to just open up Excel and have a project manager be able to ask for information from the model. Yes, I know CTC has a tool called Spreadsheet Link, and it's really powerful, but it takes you being in Revit to fetch data to pull into a spreadsheet so you can better manipulate that. Maybe you just want to access a Revit project directly from Excel, get the information, either use it for other external analytics or interact with it live. Like, you can do that with this API. Maybe you want to do something simple like standardize your sheet list. You can do that. You can force renaming of sheets and force capitalizations on text values, and it's pretty simple to do that actually with this API. You know, you could have just a simple one-click button, standardize this model, and it could run through sheet lists or text or view names and you name it. A lot of things that you can use this for in that regard. Kind of continuing on. Maybe you want to create typical room configurations at the start of a project. Maybe you want to force titles on sheets. Maybe you want to run your own custom building occupancy calc. Maybe you're a BIM manager, you want to do some project cleanup. You want to just like strip out a bunch of trash, maybe between different project stages. type swapping. I kind of mentioned that before for families, but you can also do this, say, at the push of a button instead of real time. Maybe you want to fix a bunch of work sets for objects based on custom rules that you write. Maybe you're a big fan of regex and you want to put that into your own code and do this, but you don't necessarily know C#. You could do this without having to write a formalized Revit add-in. Automated model prep for delivery or archive or different stages. I mean, et cetera, right? Like you can do so many things with this little API, and you can do it from any language. You could do it from a web portal. You could do it from, if you really wanted Dynamo, I suppose, but like why? Because that's already in Revit. But you could simplify some of your Dynamo interaction. So this is potentially, or probably for a lot of us, pretty exciting. Like many of us want this type of ability. So how do we actually access this thing? Because it's not like there's a button in the Revit UI, right? This is an API. It's a API, by the way, in case you're unaware of this. API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's a way for you to communicate via code, via language to Revit. So how would we do this? Because the end user isn't going to be clicking buttons in Revit for this thing to do something. It's for you to write custom code so you can drive whatever you want it to do. So first off, the BIM Automation API, when it's installed, registers every Revit session behind the username that's running Revit on the machine. So that location is local app data, CTC Software, BIM Automation. If you have Nexus 26.1 or newer, chances are you probably have a file sitting there if you have Revit open right now. An example for me, if I go open up my folder, that % local app data %, that is your personal folder. In my case, Sean Z, app data local, CTC Software, BIM Automation. And right here is a BIM Automation API instances.json file. And when I open up this file, in my case, it's going to open up here in Notepad. And my time tracker just decided to yell at me because it doesn't like multiple instances of Notepad++. But in here, I happen to have one instance of Revit running right now. It's Revit 2025, and it's found at this port right here. Now that's important because every instance of Revit, every time you double click the Revit executable, it is going to open up into memory. It's going to get a custom port, and you can connect to it by knowing exactly what port it's at according to what our little API here is looking at, okay? Now, if I wanted to, I can actually interact with that using just a web call. It's HTTP, if I'm on my local computer, that is, localhost, the port, and then API version 1 and whatever the route is I want to get to. Now, this does require that you have a desktop automation API key, right? This is protected by an API key, so you guys can gatekeep who can actually do things with this. If you don't have the API key, you can't actually interact with this API at all. It'll just blink at you and do nothing. So if you want one of those API keys so you can start digging in, and I encourage you to do this if you're an admin, you can email license request at ctcsoftware.com and get yourself an API key. If you have Nexus, a license of Nexus, you can get an API key. It doesn't cost anything extra. So how then do we look at this information? Well, I'm going to give you one simple example here. What port was that again? Let me just double check this here to make sure I have the right thing. 515, yeah, 42. Okay, so that's important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a web page here. I'm going to pull it across to this page over here. Just drop this up here. This is just my Internet Explorer. Okay, it's actually Edge, not Internet Explorer, it's Edge. And I'm going to put in one of those ports. So here is my localhost 51542 API. This is just looking at Revit links that exist in that particular model, and I'm passing it my API key. So when I hit enter, it goes and looks at the Revit project model and it pulls back some information. Now this looks like garbage. I'm not expecting you to interact with this kind of interface here. This isn't great. I'm just pointing out that that background running Revit session in Revit 2025 is giving up information via our API, and I can fetch data. In this case, this is specifically about Revit links that exist in that model, and it tells me information. Is it a nested link? Is it locally loaded? What is its path type? All kinds of what's its actual path, right? So it tells me this is the actual Revit link model that exists in that project. I can fetch this information. This is a simple call. This is just getting some data. I'm not pushing anything back right now, but you can access this from a web browser if you really want to. So it's not that difficult, okay? So you can do it from a web browser, but here's the reality. Postman is another tool that's kind of purposefully built to help you understand and navigate REST APIs. If you've dug into Deltek's REST API, or if you've ever gone to like Google Finance or whatever, and you look at their API so you can pull down some information of your own, you're probably investigating it a bit through Postman. You can get there by going to postman.com. I think there's like actually even a better link on our website, but this is a much easier way to navigate all of the endpoints that exist in this local host. And we've actually talked about this before in other CTC webinars. For the BIM, or for the Nexus reporting API, we talked about Postman. For the Nexus portal automation API, we talked about Postman. We're talking about it again because it really is the best way, in my opinion, to learn how to navigate through an API and kind of see what it looks like, at least a REST API. So if you want, you can actually get the Postman collection that is for this desktop automation API directly from ctcsoftware.com. If you go into your portal, so you sign into the portal online inside of here, let me just refresh this page. From dashboard, you can go to downloads, and in downloads right here is the Nexus desktop API collection right here. This was actually posted for you today, just before this webinar. Now it tells you that it requires Postman to use. Actually, all of these ones, reporting, automation, and Nexus, each require Postman. You can set that up and get your environments, but you can download exactly what I'm going to be demonstrating here next right from here. You can get access to this right now. The one requirement, again, is you do have to have a desktop automation API key, which you can get, once again, by writing license request at ctcsoftware.com. So let's dig in and do some things live, because I've been talking a lot about some functionality. Let's go actually take a look deeply at what this can do. I'll show it first in Postman, which is just, again, a way to navigate and understand what this is doing. And then I'm going to show one minor example that I set up from Excel that I like to use as a testing platform for myself, but you might also find interesting for something you might want to be doing. So this is the Postman environment, and this is my BIM Automation API sitting inside of here. There's quite a lot going on inside the BIM Automation API, a whole bunch of different significant scopes of work. So like project scope, element scope, scope boxes, levels, sheets, all these different things have different actions that you can take. So if I was in the projects scope here, and I wanted to go do something like getting the active project that exists in my environment, if I have the correct port posted inside of here for my connection, this is the 5152, then when I send this, it'll go ask the model and tell me exactly what is going on inside of that active project. The local path is this. This is the model that I happen to be in. It is not a family. It is not detached. It is not a cloud model. It is not itself a link. Let's see here. It is work shared, right? It tells me if it is in the cloud. If this was a cloud project, it would tell me what the cloud project GUID was, so I could further work with that in the future. And it tells me just the raw file name here that I happen to be in, less the .rvt at the end. So it helps me get the active project. This is the one that is currently active in the Revit interface, okay? So if you had more than one project open, you can get all open projects. You can do things like opening a project directly. So I can actually tell Revit to go open a project. Now, this is a little bit more complicated with this one. It's not just a path. It actually requires that I give it some kind of a body to go along with it. So I can tell it like, open this file at this path, you know, audit that project while it's opening, detach it when it opens, yes or no, and there's some options down here about detach and preserve, or don't detach, or detach and discard the work sets, or if this was a transmit model, clear that, so it's actually set to be a real model. There's a lot of things you can do with this, but this little body down here, you just reformat this just a little bit so it's slightly more readable, is just a little structure. This structure is called JSON. This little structure here says, open this file at this path, audit it while it opens, detach from central. Yep, go ahead and detach it and preserve the work set. So it's going to open this model detached, or I can say, don't open it detached, actually open the central. You have that control, right? I could open a cloud project. I could force the save of a project. I could force it to save as locally or to the cloud. I could force it to sync to central. If this model was not work shared, I could enable work sharing to that model. So there's all these actions here within projects that I can do. Something like the creation of levels over here, working with levels. I can get a list of all the levels that exist. I can create a new level. I can update existing levels just a basic way, or something a bit more complex with more parameter values. You can delete physical levels, which of course, if there was views, would delete the views as well. And because this is an API, it is not going to ask you questions. It's expecting that you, the developer, are smart enough to understand and do some of your own error checking. So if you say delete level, it's going to delete the level, and it's going to do all the things that go along with deleting a level, okay? Similarly, views. Get a list of all floor plan and 3D views, get a list of all view templates, create new floor plan views. Now you can also get views another way. You can go into get elements and you can specifically get the views category and tell it, and it'll give you all views. But this one here has some specific things for floor plans and 3D views, so you can create new plans or create new 3D views for the purpose of project setup. You can also update floor plans or 3D views. You can also do updates through elements if you want to do other views, and you can delete floor plans or 3D views, or you can delete them up here in elements as well. So this is just a shortcut for just specifically views, kind of a quick, easy access for some things that during project startup you want to do pretty commonly. Similar deal for sheets. Get, create, update, delete. Revit links, get them, reload them, load them from an existing link, so you can change the path of something, delete it, right? So work sets, getting them, creating them, updating them, deleting them, a bunch of things that you can do inside of here pretty easily with this little API. And you can get this API. You can get this exact thing, once again, to navigate this directly from the CTC website when you're signed into the portal here. Dashboard, downloads, Nexus desktop API collection. You can download that zip file. It has some instructions about how to load it. You just drop it into your Postman environment once you've got Postman and installed it on your system, and then you can begin to pretty much automatically start interacting with Revit. So let me give an example that I think might be a little bit compelling for some people. You might like this. Again, this is just an example, to be clear. So we aren't saying you have to do this. This is just a way that I chose to leverage this API to do some things. So I have an Excel file here. This Excel file is not currently available for download on our website, but for those of you who might be interested in further expanding upon some of the work that I've already done, you can reach out to CTC and we'll have a conversation and make sure that first you understand how the API works, but you might be able to get your hands on this particular sample file, just understanding that this is example sample code. So right now, if I wanted to, I could connect to an active Revit session that already pre-exists. 2025 is sitting right there. The port that it's at is this particular port. When I choose that, it tells me, yep, that's the project model that exists. Great. So I can connect to that. And then I can start doing things like, well, tell me what the active project is. And it'll go scan that project and look for some stuff and tell me some data about that project. Or I can say, get me the links, or get me the levels that exist in that project. And it's reaching into that Revit project and immediately pulling back to me the elements that exist in that project. Now, my current layout of data right now isn't the best. I understand that, but that's just because I haven't spent enough time doing some extra formatting on it. But the data is here. It's just up to me to interpret that data and format it a bit more cleanly. Heck, if you wanted to go even further and say, get all the elements in the project that are, and it's hiding behind my GoToWebinar window right now, that are either all categories or specifically like, give me all the doors in the project. Go ahead and get that. It'll start to fetch. This one takes a little longer because there's a few doors in my project, but it'll go in there and it'll fetch the doors. And eventually, when it's got them all, it'll drop me on the Elements tab here, giving me every parameter value of every instance of every door for every type and every family that exists in my project. And that's the way that I wrote this right now. Again, it's rough right now, but it does go and reach into the Revit project model and fetch the data that I am asking for, and it gives me that information back. And it's doing it for the Revit project model that I happen to have open here right now on my computer, just in the background. I wasn't looking at Revit, but it's accessing this Revit environment and getting the information and presenting it back however it's supposed to, except for now it's not responding because of course it does this when you're in a webinar presentation showing some stuff off. Of course it decides to not respond. So let me just close that down for a second here. And I'll come back into that. There we go. Close the program. We'll just shut that down and pretend that didn't happen. Because when you're dealing with APIs live and webinars are running, and I probably did something silly, it decided to have a little bit of a fit here. Come on, Excel, go away. There we go. I'm going to show one more example for you. This is one that I only recently put together. So it's really brand new. It's really, really rough, and may or may not work exactly as I expect it to, but I'm going to tell this to open a local Revit project. Now, I'm going to be opening a Revit project in my case that exists in a different Revit version other than the one that I already have open. So here in my little Revit models folder, I've got a Revit 2023 project. I'm just going to open this guy up. I could open up any one of these that exist, in this system, but I'm just going to choose this architecture model. But it's going to open up, actually, it's going to detect from that project model because of how I've written this. This has nothing to do with my API. This is just me interacting with the Revit project model in Windows using some VB code to ask it what Revit version it is. And it goes, oh, I'm 23. So then it goes, okay, cool. Where's Revit 2023 installed in your system? Oh, it's here. So then it opens up Revit 23. And then after Revit 23 opens, it's actually going to go ahead and open up that project, and I'll be able to do the exact same things here. Now, in this case, for me, for Sean Zerbis, right now on my system, I'm opening this up locally. But because this is an API, I could potentially have this open up Revit on a server someplace instead of on my local system. Maybe something that has a lot more resources so it can open things really fast. And then once that model is fully opened up in that Revit environment, my Excel space will say, okay, I've got that model ready for you. In my case, again, it's pulling Revit to the foreground because it is told to do so, but it's going to open that up and then pop a little dialog saying the Revit project was opened. So we'll just give this thing a second to think. You know how Revit is when you watch it. Revit opens really slowly when you watch it, of course. We're gonna go ahead and get that a few more seconds here. And this, by the way, is opening it up, not detached. It's opening up the central model. That's the way that I wrote my code, was to open the original central model. It's not even doing a local copy of it at this point because I didn't write it to do that. But it's opening up the central, and then it's bringing its information to the foreground for me so that I can begin working with that project. It should almost be open over here. Yeah, Revit's taken forever. Of course it is, because I'm in a webinar. Usually this takes all of about probably 60 to 90 seconds for this particular model, but today in the webinar, it's taking a little longer. There we go, it's fully open, look at that. And if I was over here in Excel waiting for it, there it is, Revit project successfully open. So it tells me the model is ready to go. And now if I'm like, well, tell me what project is active. It says, hey, it's that A23 model that you just opened. Oh, looks like I did open a detached model. Well, look at that. Maybe I did tell it to do that. Yeah, it is detached because I guess I left that code in there to say detached instead of opening the central. That's fine. Give me the work sets from that project. Hey, here's a list of all the work sets in that project model. I can see them. I can work with them. I could change the name of a work set and actually set a work set active or update the work set that exists there, change its name right from here because I have some buttons in my Excel space that let me do that. so that later when I create additional objects, maybe that goes onto the correct work set. So I'm doing this very, manually, calling up those exact same things like scope boxes, like links, like levels, but I'm getting the same information. I'm just presenting it in a slightly different way. But in my case, I was able to force the opening of a project that existed on my network or system, and it opens it up and then makes its information available. It opens it up because it's opening Revit in the background on some system and then connecting to it and then giving me access to that data. So that's really pretty powerful. You can take this and go wherever you want with it. So I know you all probably have a bunch of questions on this, but for right now, I'm gonna close out the recorded portion of this by saying, for all of those of you watching this online on our YouTube channel, I wanna say thank you. We hope that you found this little introduction, this comprehensive intro to what the Nexus BIM Automation, that little desktop API, what it can do. We hope that you're inspired to go use this yourself at your firm so that you can begin doing all of these extra automations perhaps that you've been wanting to do, that just getting into Revit and that whole complexity of building specific APIs for specific Revit versions, specific add-ins, that might be kind of frustrating. But this allows you to do this completely externally, Revit version agnostic. You saw me use it today with Revit 2025, but also Revit 2023 in the same space. So that's really pretty powerful. So hopefully this helps you out. If you want to see more like this, subscribe to this channel, like the video if you thought this was great, and hopefully in the future you'll join us in a live event like this, so you can join us for the QA session at the end.